Well, welcome to Teens Talk Politics. I'm Michaela Kells.
And I'm Richard Caldwell.
And today we're sitting down with U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin.
Great to join you.
All right, our first question is, what is your plan for students achieving affordable higher education? And can you please explain your recent proposed bills dealing with student debt and college affordability?
All right. Well, first of all, I think I've seen a lot of change that you've probably been hearing about and maybe even worrying about over recent years, that now as people go from high school to college, they are often taking out a ton of loans and then graduating from college with a mountain of debt just as they start their careers. And who wants to start your career with you don't want to end your career with a bunch of debt either, but I think that calls for a re-examination of how we finance higher education and give people the opportunity to prepare for their career. In terms of what I've been working on, it's a sort of combination of how do we help relieve that burden for the graduated students who already have this debt, and then how do we create a different and alternative path for those who have yet to go to college, so that they don't incur the same type of debt that their predecessors have. On the way to address people who have this huge debt burden, I think part of it is legislation that I support to allow people to refinance to lower interest rates, just the way you would with a mortgage for a home or a loan that you took out for a car or for a small business. For some reason, over the years, we haven't allowed that to happen very extensively for student loans. And it seems to me if you have a really high interest rate in your student loan, you too should be able to take advantage of lower interest rates. So that would help for people who have a lot of debt now. But that doesn't answer the question of young people who still have their higher education ahead of them. How do we make it more affordable? So one thing that I believe, and I've joined the president in his call for the first 2 years of college being tuition free. The idea that you can get your tuition waived from a 2-year community college or a 2-year technical college. If you want to do 4 years, have those credits transferable to a 4-year college. So at least the first 2 years is paid for. I think is a really smart way of looking at it, because if you look at the commitment we made 100 years ago, it was K through 12, kindergarten through high school. And the idea that you could start a career with it paid for by the public. Now people need higher education to start a career. And so maybe we should look at the commitment to K through 14 rather than K through 12. Obviously we have to find a way to pay for that, and so that is one of the things I'm looking at. But this bill is called the America's College Promise, and I have some good support for it, and I'm hoping that we can ultimately move it through the legislative process. And in the meantime, I love watching some of the initiatives that are happening at the local level as local technical colleges and community colleges are trying to find ways to reduce the expense for the students who are going to be attending.
All right. Our second question is in regards to retirement security. On your website, you state that you are a believer in retirement security. What steps have you taken to stop cuts in Medicare and Social Security? And in your opinion, how can Social Security be saved?
Excellent questions. And let me just say where the value to support retirement security comes from. And I really believe that it's part of the American dream that if you work hard and play by the rules, you should be able to get ahead. And after a lifetime of work, part of being living the American dream and earning middle class status means that you should be able to retire with security and not have to worry about going back to work in your late 70s or 80s or becoming completely impoverished because all your savings or your pension has run out. But we've seen a lot of changes whereby pensions are not as healthy as they used to be in the past. A lot of people use up their savings just getting by, maybe helping their kids go through college or helping with medical expenses or something like that and don't have a lot saved up when they retire. So Social Security and Medicare become these two programs that are central to the security of our seniors. In Medicare, there is a lot that we need to do to make sure that it's around for generations to come. Because Medicare is a health program, a lot of it is intertwined with larger reforms in the healthcare system. And with Social Security, I think it's a much simpler proposition to balance the Social Security Trust Fund and make sure that it's around for a long time, because there's not that many variables. You know, there's what is our retirement age, what is the rate at which people pay taxes into the Social Security system, how much of an individual's income is taxed, and you know, and several other variables, but they're limited. So what I would do is what we did back in the 80s is to impanel a bipartisan group and say, these are the changes we need to make it solvent, and give Congress an up or down vote on whether or not that plan is going to move forward. That worked in the 1980s and got us through many decades, and I think it could work again now to make it solvent for a longer period of time. Now, if I got to make the decision all by myself, I would do what you call raising the cap on the income that is taxed, so that people who make, say, $1 million a year, that all of their income that they pay into the Social Security Trust Fund on all of their incomes. Right now, it's capped at a much lower level, and that doesn't seem fair to me, that people with the most don't give as a fair matter to a very important retirement program.
Okay, our next question is, can you please explain the Buffett rule and how it benefits not only the economy, but the middle class, and also why government should focus more on the middle class versus the upper class?
Sure. So the Buffett rule, this actually dovetails very nicely with what I was just talking about, with making sure that people of all income sort of do their fair share. Right now, we have a tax system that has lots of loopholes, lots of write-offs and deductions and things that that oftentimes people with wealth can utilize, and poor people, people of moderate income, don't have access to these loopholes, these tax write-offs, these deductions, etc. There's so many of them that there are oftentimes people who make literally, you know, $1 million or more per year, who don't pay as high a tax rate as moderate income earners. What's fair about that? Everyone should be doing their fair share, because everyone benefits from our public investments in things like education and research and roads and things like that. In fact, without those things, some of the people who are most wealthy wouldn't have become wealthy. You know, those are the things that they relied on to become in a position to make the money that they've made. And so the Buffett rule basically says that anybody who earns over a certain amount a year will pay at the highest rate. Now, I don't know if you remember back to our last presidential election, but we had a candidate named Mitt Romney, who was arguably a multi-millionaire several times over. When he released his taxes finally during the course of that campaign, he revealed that he paid at about 13%, I think it was 13 or 14% was his tax rate. Most middle class workers pay significantly more than 13% in taxes, and so it showed the fundamental unfairness. And you know, if we're all in this together, we all need to do our part, and taxes is one of the ways we do our part. So the Buffett rule basically brings basic fairness to middle class and lower income workers.
All right. Our next question is referring to the Electoral College. Do you feel that our current election process is an effective option for selecting our president, as more Americans are classifying themselves as independents?
You know, I think that the Electoral College has worked, and it's worked for a number of reasons, and then sometimes in ways in which it's not totally apparent to the individual citizen. Literally, without the Electoral College, there would be a much greater incentive for candidates running for president to really only campaign in what we consider the big media markets. You know, why would they go anywhere other than New York City and Chicago and Los Angeles and Miami, and think of all these big places where you can reach as many voters as you can just by getting publicity for visiting these places and giving speeches. The Electoral College and the importance of getting enough electoral votes to win the election through the Electoral College requires candidates who want to represent all of us as president to travel places they would never otherwise have an incentive to go. Wisconsin has been a big deal state in many of the last presidential elections, and we've seen the candidates come in and spend time here. We have 2 presidential debates that are going to happen in the state of Wisconsin this election cycle, one for the Republican primary and one for the Democratic primary. That's extraordinary. Little old Wisconsin. We know that we're the best, but we only have 5.7 million people who live here. Why do we get this? Because of the Electoral College, interestingly, and because of the importance for these candidates. So regardless of whether more and more people are thinking about themselves as independents, they're still playing a role in electing our president. And I think the Electoral College gives all voters, Democrat, Republican, Independent, third-party folks, more access to the people who are making their case to be president.
Okay. In your opinion, is your responsibility as a congresswoman to mirror the wishes of your constituents, or to use your best judgment in order to make a decision?
You know, I have to say, in the time that I've served in elective office, in legislative branch office, and I've had the honor of being in the State Assembly years ago, and then the House of Representatives, and now as a United States Senator, that I draw on a little bit of each. So there are some values that I have to do with my upbringing and things that I feel so strongly about that even if I was in opposition to the majority of the voters who put me in office, I would still have to go with that basic value. And so then it's really important that I say that in my election and let a voter know, look, you know, I am opposed to the death penalty, for example. And I know that a majority of Wisconsinites probably support the death penalty, not that we have it in the state, but you know, that's an example of something where I may be at odds, but if I ever have this come up as a vote, I'm going to vote my conscience and my values. That said, there are a whole host of issues that I don't feel that strongly about that may be issues that I interact with my constituents and they have an expertise that they're sharing with me. Let me give you an example. One of the things that I have become really involved in becoming a U.S. Senator and representing now the whole state of Wisconsin is learning about issues that I didn't deal with before from my district in southern Wisconsin. So forestry is a perfect example. The northern part of our state has these incredible forests, and I don't have, I'm always going to vote one way on a forestry issue. This is the type of issue where I gather my constituents with expertise around, and we have roundtables and we have discussions, and their wisdom guides me. and informs my decisions and what sort of actions I take and legislation that I associate myself with. And so I think I really, in some ways, completely mirror my constituents when I'm advocating, because they know better in their areas of expertise. And in these other issues, you know, I can think of a set of them. For example, support of civil rights and LGBT rights in particular, something that I've always felt so strongly in support of. When I first articulated my views, I'm sure the vast majority of the state had different views, and actually now one of the things that's really rewarding is to see over time the views coming more together.
All right, and our final question is, what do you see as the biggest problem that the youth is currently facing?
Oh, well, first of all, I would never impose my judgment. I'd ask and listen, because I think that's so important. I can tell you what I've heard from some of my youngest constituents, and I tend to agree this makes a lot of sense. First of all, I would say issues around the environment and climate change, because the youngest people are going to be around this planet the longest. Those of us who are older aren't going to live with the consequences of some of the short-sighted judgments that have been made and policies that are in place. And so oftentimes my engagement with you know, my younger constituents, my youngest constituents, is around the environment. What are you doing to make sure that you know, that we have clean water and clean air, and that we don't have such rapid change in the planet's climate that life will be unsustainable at some point, or at least much more difficult. So that's one that I hear a lot. Certainly I hear very basic and immediate concerns about the economy, and sort of when I'm finished with my education, will there be jobs available? Will I be able to start a family and support a family? In, you know, again, in even more detail, the affordability of a college education becomes very relevant in that path. But those are among the issues that I hear a lot about, and I really appreciate this show for engaging young people in those conversations. I think sometimes that that teens are much more political than they think they are, because they're thinking about those issues and engaging with peers and in their communities about those issues, but don't necessarily think of themselves as political if they haven't maybe volunteered on a campaign yet. Well, it's all the same proposition, and you know, if you care about the future, you probably care about politics.